Hi, my name is Negro, and I'll be presenting the United States versus Lopez on behalf of Group 8. The other members being Vitaly Madov, Carly Mahoney, Jeremy Sheik, Aaron Worthen, and myself. So as an overview, I'll discuss the facts of the case, and there will be a discussion of the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990, followed by a discussion of the Commerce Clause, and then the dissent rendered by the Supreme Court, followed by the basis for the dissent, and the opinion by the majority, and we'll close with how this case is applied today. So the facts of the case. Mr. Lopez, or Alfonso Lopez Jr., was a senior at Edison High School, and on March 10th, 1992, he carried a concealed .38 revolver with 5 cartridges into the school. The gun wasn't loaded, and upon confrontation, Mr. Lopez said that his intent was to deliver the weapon to another person for which he would receive $40 for, and cheap for a .38 caliber revolver, if you ask me. And I know some of you are wondering whether or not he already received the $40, because we can get into a discussion of breach of contract, but I'll stay on task here. Acting on an anonymous tip, he was confronted by school authorities, and he admitted right away that he was indeed carrying the weapon. The following day, he was indicted with charges for violating the Federal School Zones Act of 1990. And this act prohibits any unauthorized individual from knowingly possessing a firearm at a place that they believe or have good cost or reasonable cause to believe is a school zone. Mr. Lopez moved to dismiss these charges and this indictment, saying that this was unconstitutional and beyond the power of Congress to legislate control over public schools. He was convicted of this indictment, and then he appealed to the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. This was later, they reversed the decision of the lower courts, and then the petition moved to the Supreme Court to review the case. They held that the Gun-Free School Zone Act was an unconstitutional exercise of congressional authority, and they upheld the decision of the appeals court. The majority of this case hinges on the Commerce Clause, so I think it's relevant to discuss the Commerce Clause here. It's a major source of congressional power because it regulates almost any commercial activity. And there's 2 parts to the Commerce Clause. The first part is interstate commerce, and this is pretty domestic. Congress is empowered to regulate interstate commercial activity. The second part is international, so the difference being interstate and international. And the international section allows Congress to regulate commercial activity between the United States and other countries. So this case will be primarily focused on the first portion of the Commerce Clause, or interstate commerce. The law was created by Congress. Any law that's created by Congress must have constitutional basis. So our example here is, say they wanted to create a law regarding the regulation of semi-trucks. If they can show or demonstrate that there is a significant interstate commercial activity and there's an impact on commerce, then they can move forward with regulating this. So dissent was authored by Justice Breyer, and he was joined by Justice Stevens, Justice Souter, and Justice Ginsburg. And they primarily argued that the Commerce Clause affords regulation power based on 3 principles. The first of these principles was that Congress can regulate any activities that significantly affect interstate commerce, the key word here being significantly. The second key point was a consideration of a cumulative effect of similar instances. So in this particular case, not just this one instance of Mr. Lopez bringing a gun to school, but how would this impact commerce if multiple incidents or multiple students were bringing guns on or near a school premises? The third piece of their dissent was that there needs to be leeway or a rational basis to determine a connection between a regulated activity and interstate commerce. So what this means here is that this isn't in black and white. So Congress needs to be afforded some wiggle room, basically, to determine whether or not an activity should be regulated and if it has a significant impact on interstate commerce. And the dissent here hinged on this rational basis for extrapolating a connection between gun-related school violence and interstate commerce. So they were trying to tie this particular incident into a significant impact on interstate commerce. Here, the point being a degradation of the quality of education. Now, their basis for dissent, Justice Breyer cited statistics first relating the problem of guns to schools, particularly gun violence and how this impacts schools. His next element of his dissent was to bring in an economic purview. And specifically here, he was trying to link economic productivity to formal education. Following World War II, most people still did apprenticeships, and that's how they received their education, was on-the-job training, basically. And that, of course, as we know, has graduated to a formal education where you have your 12 years, usually followed by college, your 4 years of college, and then master's or doctorate, depending on your area of expertise. That was his next point, is that there's an economic demand for greater educational skills, meaning there's a higher focus on these, on all 12 years of school followed by college. He further talked about the global competition pressure for students staying in school longer and finishing their education in order for the United States to be competitive. And in the global arena, our students need to finish their course of education. So you can see here how he's kind of tying this degradation of the quality of education back to the economy. And he also cited that certain firms determine their location based on a viable workforce with a basic education. So again, he's trying to tie all these things back to education. And the reason for this is, in light of all the above factors that we discussed, he wanted to say that all of these things collectively are at risk when it comes to gun-related violence. It's not just this one instance, but there's a ripple effect. Like you throw a pebble in the pond and you can see it ripple out, so it affects not only the local areas, but even the United States' global viability as far as competing with other countries. And this here was how he hinged on saying that this was a serious economic threat. This was his impact. Opposite of him was Chief Justice Rehnquist, who was joined by Justices O'Connor, Scalia, Kennedy, and Thomas. And they basically said that the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990 does not regulate interstate commerce, or should not regulate interstate commerce. He meaning Justice Rehnquist, specifically addressed Justice Breyer's dissent, saying, if we were to take any adverse impact, anything that could adversely impact the learning environment, we could kind of extrapolate this out. And then anything could be subjected to federal regulation that has a significant impact on classroom learning. He specifically cited a school's curriculum. So if a school's curriculum was subpar, you could see how this could also have a ripple effect and make the United States workforce less viable because they're not getting the education they need to be competitive. And this would subsequently result to a direct regulation of the entire educational process. And this also establishes precedent, not only for the public schools, but for other areas. Any area where they could tie something of significant impact to the overall greater scheme of economy, they could then insert themselves as a regulatory body. And the reason why this is so important is because this blurs the line between state and federal powers. If the federal government can make these links between incidents that happen on the state level and then extrapolate this out to global economy, you can see how they can, a little kernel could be taken and ran with. So how is this case applied today? Up until the United States versus Lopez, nothing ever really challenged the Commerce Clause since the New Deal in 1937. after United States versus Lopez, there were several other cases. So this case in itself was the centerpiece for checking the federal and state balance of power. This was the first case to say, no, that's kind of an overreach by Congress, and they're going outside their arena, so we need to dial back. It was followed by U.S. versus Morrison shortly after, which also decreased the federal enforcement through the Commerce Clause. Later, the Gun-Free School Zone Act was repealed as its enforcement was considered unconstitutional. And after this challenge to the constitutionality, saying that Congress was overreaching, it was repealed. But a new version, I guess you could call it a new version of the Gun-Free School Zone Act, was reenacted in 2002 as part of the No Child Left Behind. Not to entirely dismiss the dissenting justices' opinions, they really highlighted the importance of the education system and how that impacts national commerce. Specifically, Justice Breyer was focused on gun violence and how that could negatively impact national commerce. So there was a leeway there that wasn't afforded him, but the theory behind that was taken into consideration. The decision in favor of Lopez reopened the discussion of this balance of power, as I mentioned earlier, where there was a check between the state and federal government. And this decision also added ammunition, no pun intended, to the states trying to fight congressional powers. And that's been Group 8's presentation on the United States versus Lopez. Thank you.